Museum, and thank you for coming to tonight's program, MTA's Open Data Stories. My name is Hillary. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator here. On your way back through the museum, you actually walked through our newest exhibit, which is really a celebration of the 120 years of the subway. And there's kind of an overlap of theme tonight. We're going to learn about how data helps you tell stories. And I think that exhibit, which is called The Subway Is ... also gives you a lot of different ways to think about how transit shapes our lives, shapes the city. And maybe you could even add your story to the end of that ... So hopefully you'll have more time to come and check it out with more than just a couple minutes to walk through. We are open from Wednesday to Sunday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. If you're new to our programs, I highly encourage you to check out our website. Make sure you're signed up for our newsletter. That gives you all the great updates. I could actually give you a little update for next month. We're going to have a program in the museum on Thursday, February 6th. We're going to feature the curator and artist from the Met's Flight to Egypt exhibit, as well as the deputy director from MTA Arts and Design, and some artists with work in the system, and they'll be talking about the intersection of art and identity. But today's program is MTA's Open Data Stories. We're really excited to have members of the Subway Stories project here. We have Jediah Katz, Mark Zitelli, and Julia Hahn, who will be showing us how they have applied MTA's open data in a really inventive way. But first, we'll be hearing from Lisa Mae Fiedler. Lisa is the MTA's Open Data Manager. In her 3 years at the agency, she has grown MTA's open data program into a reliable source of public data across a wide variety of topic areas. She heads an amazing team who supports the mission of open data and increased data transparency. So to tell us more about what all that entails, I'll hand it over to Lisa.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. What a wonderful group of nerds we've put in one room together. All right, so show of hands, how many people have heard of MTA's Open Data Program before tonight? Keep your hand raised if you've used an MTA Open Data set before. All right, we're among a pretty good crowd. So I hope after tonight's talk, you'll feel inspired, if you haven't already, to check out MTA's Open Data, maybe play around with one of our data sets and build something cool. But first, I'm gonna make sure that we all are on the same page about what open data is. So open data is data that is freely available, it's machine readable, standardized, reusable. In other words, this is data that can be downloaded onto your computer, most typically in a CSV format. I think there's probably some users here of Excel, maybe some more advanced tools. It's data that can be read into a table and you can use it. Open data is not a table in a PDF format. Boo, we don't like that. We don't like pre-prepared charts. They're sometimes okay if they're accompanied by data that is open and you yourself can use. So in 2021, the MTA Open Data Act was signed into law by Governor Hochul, and this renewed MTA's commitment to transparency and sharing our data through the state's open data portal, which is on data.ny.gov. It's been really cool to be in this role for the past 3 years since the passing of this act and see how open data has increased transparency and improved MTA's relationship with our customers. But I think it's been also really cool to see how this act has transformed how the MTA uses data internally. We can't share data out publicly if we ourselves don't know where it is or how to even use it. So it's really changed the way that the MTA interacts with data internally and uses data to make decisions. So we share a lot of data on the Open Data Portal. This slide is meant to be unreadable. Probably, I don't know, it's kind of like an eye exam trying to read this. We have nearly 150 data sets as of today on the state's Open Data Portal, and they range from a wide variety of topics. So the MTA is more than just the New York City transit, subway, and bus system. We also operate paratransit. There's Long Island Railroad, Metro North Railroad. We operate bridges and tunnels in the New York City region. We're also just a regular company, so we have things like finances and payroll and HR data. There is data on all of these topics available on the Open Data Portal. So one of the first things I did when I started in this role was work with my teammate, Renuma, who is somewhere here. I think. And we developed our open data user personas. So as a public agency, we want our data to be usable by more than just someone who is extremely data or tech savvy. We want our program to reach people who maybe don't actually care about the raw data themselves. Maybe they do like the PDF, they like the pre-made chart, but they do want that sense that the MTA is being transparent. So Renu and I developed these 8 users that we want our program to serve. Maybe as someone in the audience, you identify with one or more of these characters that we have here. And these are people that we think about a lot as we develop data sets and resources and different things to accompany the actual data to make sure that our users feel supported. So I'm going to go through some of the resources that my team supports, and maybe you can think about how each of these different characters here might interact with these platforms. So first we have the Open Data Portal itself. This is data.ny.gov. Huge thing to note, the MTA is a state public authority. So if you look for our open data on the New York City Open Data Portal, it is not there. You have to go to the state's Open Data Portal. We love the the program from New York City. They are great friends of ours. If you go to the catalog, you can search for MTA open data sets under agencies and authorities, or if you know the topic you're interested in, you can use the search bar like you would Google. So this is where you find raw data. If you're interested in learning more about how you can interact with raw data, we do events every March as part of New York City Open Data Week, and we'll do live demos for how you can actually download and interact with the data. Tonight, we're here to tell stories with data, so I'm not going to go through that. Another product my team supports is the dashboard metrics.mta.info. So this is built off of that open data on the Socrata platform. I think the coolest thing about this site is it's built off of open source tools, and all the data itself is also open. So in other words, the MTA doesn't need to be the person that's creating this website. Literally any of you could. All the tools, all the data is there for you. I'll admit it's not the prettiest site. We are data people, we are not designers, so if anyone wants to help out, our eventual goal is to make the site open source, and so people in the public can contribute to it as well and maybe help us make it prettier. Another resource that we put out is our data and analytics blog. So maybe you're just data curious. You don't actually want to work with the numbers, but you like reading about the people who do work with them. You can check out our blog. We tell a lot about the work that goes into building certain data sets, why things are hard, why some things are easier. There's a lot here. We have pictured here, one of my favorite posts is a MetroCard journey through computing history. This was written by one of our data engineers, and it tells you why getting historic ridership data is so complicated. So if any of that stuff is of interest to you, we do have a program page on the MTA website. Everything I've mentioned so far is linked here, so feel free to check this out if it sparked your interest. And finally, not online, but in person, like we are right now, we do a lot of public engagement events, which can be fun and also terrifying. So we participate in conferences, we present at board meetings. Bottom left, we did a datathon with CUNY, which was so much fun. And then bottom right is my teammate, Nikki, who's here tonight. We called this part of her budget press tour. One of the biggest accomplishments that she helped lead the team do is publish MTA's operating budget on open data. This was a big reason for why the MTA Open Data Law exists. It is now on open data thanks to her, and then we kind of forced her out into public to talk to people about how it was created and what you can find in the data set. All right, so before I pass it to the Subway Stories team to tell us more about the cool projects that they built with open data, I did want to highlight some things that the MTA has built with open data that maybe the crowd will find interesting. So here we've got a simple line chart of system-wide bus speeds. On the y-axis, we're in miles per hour, and x-axis is by month. This is built off of our bus speeds by route data set. Any thoughts about what's happening here? Maybe you'll notice that buses are faster in March and April of 2020 Do we remember what happened then, or have we blocked it out of our memories? So yeah, I think this chart tells a pretty interesting story that the buses did move faster during COVID when people were not on the roads. Or in buses, yeah, people weren't going anywhere, the buses moved faster. To accompany this data set, we actually recently published a more granular version. So this particular visual is built off of our bus speeds data set, which is at the full route level. We also publish a bus speeds data set at the segment level between time points. So you can really see within a bus route where are the segments where buses are moving quicker or slower. I really hope people in the audience here, you all look pretty data savvy. You'll take a look at this data set. You can use it to see how bus speeds are changing within the CBD. January data will be uploaded in February, so just a little plug to check that out. All right, here is another chart. On the y-axis, we have crimes per million riders, and x-axis, again, is month. So we're looking here at crimes per million riders on the subway. So my dad is here. He's from out of town. He's here with his girlfriend. And if anyone here has family who is from out of town, I think you are very familiar with the conversation that they bring up about how could you possibly ride transit? It is so dangerous on the subway. All of this crime is happening. Look, it is not that dangerous. There's my dad. It's actually trending downwards. So next time any of your family brings this up, you can show them open data and show them subway isn't that bad. All right, here we're taking a look at operating budget by expense type. This is built off of the operating budget data set I mentioned earlier. There's a lot going on here. We've got 3 bars, actuals year to date, budget year to date, and annual budget. This particular visual was pulled in November, and so the data isn't as of January, which is why the budget year to date doesn't quite match the annual budget. I think the main thing to take away here is, one, there's a lot of different types of expenses that the MTA is reporting on, right? Very colorful bar chart. Another key takeaway is the MTA spends quite a bit of money on payroll. This is to be expected. The MTA is a labor-intensive organization. We have over 70,000 employees. It makes a lot of sense that that's where a lot of the money in our operating budget goes to. So a lot going on here. Hope people will check out the data set and learn more about where the MTA is spending money. All right, the last chart I'll show you is delays on Metro North Railroad. So on the y-axis, we're looking at a count of delays by different categories. Again, time on the x-axis. Different categories that are in here might be hard to see. We've got things like customer assistance, police, capital projects can delay trains. I really like this data set because it goes back so far in time. You can really see trends in how Metro North has improved their operations a lot since the train was running 10 years ago, and you can see that they've significantly decrease the amount of delays that happen on the railroad. We're always looking to add more historic data to our data sets. There are a lot of reasons why this can be challenging, so it's really cool to have this data set as well as one for Long Island Railroad that goes back more than 10 years. Okay, so those are all the MTA highlights I wanted to do, but it's really cool whenever I get to see things that members of the public build as well. So I just wanted to highlight a few projects that I've enjoyed looking at over the years. The top left is one of the first dashboards that I ever saw someone from the public build from our daily ridership data set. And this was so cool to me to see someone build something better than we could have done ourselves. And I was at a talk and showing the slide, and the guy who made this dashboard was in the audience, and I was like, this is amazing, we've come full circle. Bottom left is our friends from reInvent Albany. They were a big advocate for the MTA Open Data Law getting passed, so thank you to everyone there for my job. It's been great. They are a big user of all of our budget data sets, our procurement data sets to advocate for a more effective MTA and also to advocate on the MTA's behalf when we do need things like money for the capital program. And then on the right-hand side, for any subscribers to the New York Times, I think every 6 months or so they'll put out a "How well do you know the New York City subway" quiz. A little tip is you can actually get most of the answers from this quiz from open data. So if you are really dedicated, you can get 10 out of 10. I actually have never gotten that myself, but one day. Okay, and then finally, this past fall, we ran the MTA Open Data Challenge, where we kind of called on members of the public to build something cool using our open data sets. I'll call up the Subway Stories team in a minute, and this is how we got introduced. But I did want to highlight 2 other projects that I really love. There's a whole slew of them that we highlight in a blog post that we have, and many more that we couldn't share. So just want to say thank you to everybody who participated in this challenge. It was quite overwhelming, but also one of the best weeks I've had at work in a long time, where I just got to look at cool things people built with our data. But on the left, we have a Zine by Will Myers. If you give a rad a Metro card, I never thought ridership data could be cute, but he made it cute. And then on the right, we have Art Off the Rails by Stephanie Dang. She made this really cool interactive map. And we love this project because the MTA Arts team has been wanting to make something like this for a very long time. They are arts people, they're program managers, they are not front-end designers. And so when they saw this, they were like, this is amazing. This is what we wanted to do, but we didn't have the skills to do it. And that's what open data is for, right? People can use the data and build something that maybe the MTA does not have the capacity to do ourselves. So that is all from me. If this was interesting to you, or if you have questions about open data, you can always email the team at opendata@mtahq.org. We also have members of the open data team here. Do they want to raise their hands? Because they do have stickers on them. So if you want an MTA Open Data sticker, come find them afterwards. It's exclusive swag. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it to the Subway Stories team. So to introduce them, we have Jediah Katz. He is a senior software engineer who works at Figma, a software tool for digital design and prototyping. Previously, he was a lecturer in the computer science department at the University of Pennsylvania, creating and teaching a course on computational problem solving. His interest in transit was sparked by his upbringing in Yorkville, Manhattan, from years commuting to school on the 456 trains and living above 2nd Avenue subway construction. Mark Zitelli is a Manhattan Valley native and a data analyst who has worked as a political consultant on a wide range of campaigns, both local and national in scale. He is specialized in using data analysis to predict voting behavior. And last but not least, we have Julia Hahn, a product designer who works at Figma, again, a software tool for digital design and prototyping. She recently moved to New York from Vancouver, Canada, and has enjoyed learning more about New York's expansive subway system while working on this project. So please join me in welcoming the Subway Stories team.
Thanks so much, Lisa. And thanks all of you again for coming tonight. It takes a really dedicated crowd to come in such a cold night to sit in a non-climate controlled subway station. My name is Jediah, and I'm here with my amazing partners, Mark and Julia, as Lisa said, and tonight we're here to talk to you about our project, Subway Stories. Lisa just gave an amazing overview of her open data team at the MTA, and in September, the MTA hosted its first Open Data Challenge, which, as Lisa put it, invited members of New York City to submit something cool using the MTA's open data. And we were really proud of our submission, Subway Stories, which was voted the most creative submission and even got a shout out from Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine. So as you'll see very soon, our project pairs an interactive map of where people are coming and going on the subway with 5 journalistic stories that follow different communities as they travel throughout New York on the subway. I'm gonna take this out. But before I show you the project, I want to start out with a point about the power of narrative. Here on screen, I have tweets that I've compiled while I was putting together this talk. Political figures and everyday citizens are all trying to answer a hot-button question. Is crime up in New York City? you can see that people are bitterly divided on this issue. I'm not going to try to answer this question in my talk. It's a very big topic, but here we have Elon Musk, who says, New York City is experiencing insane gridlock surface traffic because people are legitimately afraid to take the subway or to walk. On the other side, we have Mayor Eric Adams, who says, murders are down, shootings are down, transit crime is down, car thefts are down, the safest big city in America just got even safer. With all this noise, you can't blame people for not knowing what to believe, especially people from out of town, like Lisa's dad. Sorry. But especially with this topic, crime, it's really tricky because crime refers to not just a single event, but an entire constellation of events that's happening at the scale of New York, a scale too big for any one person to actually comprehend. One of the most powerful tools we have to understand large-scale phenomena like crime is data analytics, and it's a necessary tool. The scientific method tells us that as tempting as it is to take our own personal experiences and apply them to this city of 8 million people, we need to resist the urge to do that. Maybe I got mugged, and I feel like New York is no longer safe anymore. But maybe somebody else has never had such a problem, and they feel like New York is really safe. And now me and this person are on the internet, and we're typing and we're arguing, and this is exactly like what we're seeing today. So it would be great if I could tell this other person, here's the data, here's the facts. But unfortunately, we don't feel data. Data analytics is a pretty recent invention. It can be complicated sometimes, and it can make our eyes glaze over. But the human tradition of storytelling, narrative, is more than 30,000 years old, and it resonates with us deeply and immediately. So while data is really powerful for uncovering the truth of what's happening, narrative is much more powerful for actually convincing the public. And narratives can really say anything. Obviously, we see a lot of stories in the news about crime running rampant. These are the kinds of stories that make us afraid or angry, and then we click on them. But there's also stories, of course, about how New York City is safe, even if they're a little less exciting. For example, and this is a true story, one day over the summer, I was sitting at Union Square reading a book. And I got up to go, and in a moment of forgetfulness, I left my backpack hanging on the back of the chair. And it was probably 30 minutes before I realized my mistake. And then I realized, and I came running back, and lo and behold, the bag was still there in the middle of Union Square, everything inside, contents completely untouched. And so from that story, I can safely conclude that New York City is safe and crime is down, right? No, obviously not. But the point is that data and narrative both have glaring weaknesses. But maybe by combining the two of them, we can craft a compelling story that's still rooted in nuanced truth. Now, crime is just one popular topic these days, but there are a million narratives all over New York City, and data can tell us about every single one of them. And so, with that lesson in mind, we created our project, Subway Stories, as an experiment in combining the insights from MTA's open data with the powerful human stories that surround us in New York City. So without further ado, I'm going to go to Subway Stories at NYC, and let's actually dive into the project. So Subway Stories is set on this map of the New York City transit system. Each of these bars on the map represents one of the 424 subway stations in the city. The size of the bar represents activity at that station. So right now, we're actually looking at how many people are getting off or exiting each station at 4 o'clock on an average Saturday. So could anyone wager a guess, and feel free to just shout it out, what do you think is this big red line, the most popular station where people are going on a Saturday? Yeah, I'm hearing Times Square, that's right. So Times Square it happens to be the busiest station in the entire system, and on average Saturday at 4 o'clock, between 4 and 5, nearly 8,000 people got out at this station. And that's actually likely an underestimate. So by looking at where people are getting out of the train, we can see all these popular destinations, like Times Square here, Grand Central, and Union Square. And then even outside of Manhattan, we have busy neighborhoods like Jackson Heights over there, and Flushing, Queens. Now, we got all this data using one of the MTA's most sophisticated publicly available data sets published by Lisa's team. It's called the Origin to Destination Ridership Estimate. So this data set allows us to know how many people are coming or going from any station at any time of day and any month of the year. So Even more powerfully than that, this data set actually allows us to know how many people are going from one station to another. So for example, if I wanted to know, let's say how many people are getting on the train at, let's say, Grand Central subway station and then taking it to Fulton Street, we can actually give you an estimate of that number for some hour of the day. So we use this data to great effect in our 5 stories, and I'm going to give you a preview of 2 of them. One which is more general and one which is more human-centered. So the first story is the story of New York City's economy. In many ways, this is the defining story of the New York City subway. So much of the subway system is set up to bring us to work in the morning and then bring us home at the end of the day. The scale of this story is massive. Each of these bars on the map represents thousands of people who are getting off the subway during the morning rush hour. And where are they going? Well, the busiest station here actually happens to be Grand Central. And if we hover over it, we can see that during the busiest hour, which is coming up, more than 18,000 people got out at Grand Central Station. These are probably people who either work around there or actually going to Grand Central train station to take it out of the city. And just by looking where people are getting off the train, we can actually identify the busiest commuter neighborhoods, or sorry, the busiest business hubs where people are going to work. Midtown Manhattan is by far the most bustling, followed by the financial district. And then in a distant third, we have downtown Brooklyn down there. And then, fun fact, the 4th busiest is actually Flushing, Queens. So now what would happen if we actually reverse the direction of travel? Right now, we're looking at where people are getting off the train during rush hour. What if we were to look at where they're getting on the train during rush hour? What insights would that give us? So the next page in our story covers that. And now, if we're looking at where people are getting onto the subway during rush hour, of course we see these bustling commuter neighborhoods in the outer boroughs like Jackson Heights, Flushing, and Williamsburg over here. But even more interestingly, if we look at Manhattan, we can actually pick out the main commuter gateways that bring people from out of town into the city. These are people who are coming from Connecticut, from New Jersey, Westchester, Long Island, and they work in Manhattan. So how do they get into Manhattan? Well, hopefully less of them are driving now, but they are taking a bus or a train to the Port Authority, to Grand Central, to Penn Station, to the PATH train, which are some of those smaller smikes in Manhattan. And once they arrive in Manhattan, they're getting on the subway to actually go to where they need to go to work. So later in this story, my partner Mark, he shares his own experience of taking the bus from the Port Authority every day to go the opposite direction, out of Manhattan. But I want to actually refocus our attention on a different story, a more personal one. This is the story of how New York's huge Chinese community stays connected through the subway. This story starts deep in Brooklyn, early on a Saturday morning. Each of these bars on the map now represents 30 to 40 people who are getting on the train and going to Chinatown, to the Grand Street station. They're coming from Sunset Park, from Bensonhurst, from Avenue U, all of these Chinese enclaves in deep Brooklyn. And nowadays, young Chinese people are much more likely to move to enclaves in Brooklyn and Queens than they are to actually live in Manhattan's Chinatown, which is aging in more ways than one. So we wanted to understand, why are all these people actually going so early in the morning from Brooklyn to Chinatown? And in order to understand that, we interviewed Anna Lee, who grew up in Sunset Park and now lives in Bensonhurst. And what she told us is that even though young people are less likely to move to Chinatown, it's still a crucial gathering place for their community. She told us stories about people going to Chinatown to play in rec volleyball and basketball leagues, to work part-time at boba shops, and to call on elderly relatives. And especially stressed the importance of respecting elders in her culture. It would be rude to ask them to come all the way out here to Brooklyn, and so the younger people go to them and visit. The last question that I had for Anna was, why are they going so early in the morning? My parents were actually in the crowd, and they could probably tell you that the only thing I've ever done at 8 a.m. on a Saturday is sleep. And Anna said, that one's easy, actually. They go in the morning for dim sum. So that was just a preview of 2 of the stories of Subway Stories. And if you found them interesting, I hope you'll go later to subwaystories.nyc and read some of the other stories for yourself. Now, I'm going to pass off the mic to my partner, Mark, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how we actually gathered these stories.
Thank you, Jediah. So when we were looking for stories to pick, we needed some system to determine which story ideas to move forward with and which story ideas to reject. So we developed a system of 3 principles that we used to define a good story. First, and most obviously, we wanted stories that were interesting and provided a unique or subtle insight into the data set. Second, the ridership data set we used highlights the wonderful diversity of our city, as our mass transit system is truly one of the only things that connects us all across race, background, economic class, and literally connects us across geography. So we wanted to pick stories that would illustrate and reflect those connections. Finally, we wanted stories that were New York scale. On average, 4 million people every day ride the subway. So while there are probably a ton of great stories to pick from, we wanted to pick ones that wouldn't get lost in the sheer volume of the system and were easy to spot on a map. In order to better explain how we picked good stories, first I'm going to give an example of a story idea we ended up not moving forward with. After our discovery of the Chinatown story that Jediah just described, we were interested to see if enclaves of other ethnic groups also use the subway to stay connected over distance. One community we were interested in was the Puerto Rican community, with neighborhoods in Parkchester in the Bronx, East Harlem, and the Lower East Side in Manhattan. This image is from our initial exploration, where we were looking at arrivals and departures from Parkchester to East Harlem and the Lower East Side, looking to see if there was a noticeable trend. And after analyzing the data, we saw some connection between the stops that served these respective communities, but the Lexington Avenue line is the busiest line in the entire system, and while we saw some data there, it wasn't really convincing or evident on the map. We found the same to be true for some other communities. For example, we looked at different Polish neighborhoods distributed throughout Brooklyn, and we also looked at Dominican neighborhoods in Washington Heights and parts of the Bronx. Now, this is not to say that these connections don't exist or that these stories aren't there, but it highlights the importance of making sure the data dictates the narrative and not the other way around. And if we have hypotheses about potential trends in the data, we need to make sure they are strongly supported by the data. So, how did we find good stories? The inspiration for some stories came from our own personal experiences. For example, I was commuting to New Jersey through the Port Authority for a while and was blown away by the sheer volume of incoming traffic. So we did a story about out-of-city commuters into New York. We've been to the US Open and Mets games, and we always noted the large crowds those events drew. So we did a story about fans at the US Open and other events in Flushing Meadows. My friends and I often enjoy going out in Williamsburg and Bushwick, and we wanted to see if our nighttime exploits were reflected in the data at scale. They were, so we did a story about nightlife along the L train. Again, I want to emphasize that this is where the inspiration for these stories came from, but it was the data at scale that made them good, complete stories that we included in our project. Some stories were more serendipitous, and finding them required deeper analysis of the data. While we were working on the US Open story, as the clock struck 4 a.m., we noticed a large spike in outgoing traffic in certain areas in Jackson Heights. So we investigated weekend early morning commuter traffic in Jackson Heights. This led us to consider other middle or working class neighborhoods and compare weekend commuter traffic in those neighborhoods with more affluent neighborhoods to see if the data supported a noticeable difference or trend. This led us to create the more comprehensive story that we published on the website, The Weekend Shift, which includes our initial observations from Jackson Heights as well as from other neighborhoods. When we noticed trends in data that were not common knowledge or that we didn't have personal experience with, we often sought interviewees who could either confirm or deny our hypotheses and provide valuable context for our observations. If you played around with the Subway Stories website at all, you'll notice that every story we published includes some form of interview. This is something we felt very strongly about. But why? What is the importance of interviews, and why did we feel so strongly about it? In short, interviews add a human touch and provide context for observations. The data shows us what, but doesn't frequently show us why. For example, we see a large amount of people traveling from Bensonhurst to Chinatown in Manhattan early in the morning, but why? Just looking at the data, this isn't inherently obvious at all. Enter interviewee. The first line of that story was, they go in the morning for dim sum. So not only does an interview corroborate our observations and provide an explanation, but it completely humanizes the story in a way that the data alone never could. You can see another example of the importance of interviews in the Weekend Shift story. When we first observed that large spike of traffic early in the morning in Jackson Heights, we weren't really sure what was causing it. Maybe it was just a densely populated neighborhood, maybe it was the close proximity of interconnected subway lines that accounted for the spike. But who better to ask than somebody with a front row seat to it all? A local food truck vendor stationed directly below the elevated platform at 74th Street in Jackson Heights and whose shift starts early in the morning. So I got on the train and headed over. After walking around for a bit and enjoying a delicious combo over rice, Rahman from 74th Street Halal was gracious enough to talk to me for a few minutes. And in our conversation, he confirmed that there are in fact a lot of early morning weekend commuters leaving that neighborhood. So how do we find people in general to interview? I just gave one example, but honestly, finding good interviews was hard. None of us had any real journalistic experience, and we had to use a different approach to find interviewees depending on the type of story we were working on. For stories that were inspired by personal experience, this was often a bit easier, as we could draw on that experience or reach out to friends or other people in our close circles. For stories that we discovered in the data that we didn't have a personal connection to, this was trickier and often involved reaching out to friends of friends of friends, ex-roommates, coworkers, or just walking around the subway stop until somebody agreed to talk to me. Whatever gets it done, right? There are so many more great stories to uncover, and we've just barely scratched the surface. At the time of this project's inception, we only had data from 2023 and part of 2024, but since then, the MTA has released data from 2020 through the present. The next question we want to answer with this data set is New York City still the city that never sleeps? We didn't have access to any pandemic-era data when we were working on this project, but now we can try to pinpoint if people are still going out as much as they used to, if they're still going to the same places that they used to go to, and if they're still staying out as late as they used to. The possibilities are really endless. I hope this provided a useful insight into how we chose and developed the stories that we included in this project, and now I'm going to hand it off to Julia, who's going to explain how she made the whole website look so amazing. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Mark. Sweet. So now I'm going to share more of the process behind designing and also brainstorming for Subway Stories. So in addition to the wonderful Stories tab that Jediah had showed earlier, we also included an Explore tab for you to freely play around with and observe any patterns of ridership that pique your interest. This Explore tab includes more granular controls, such as specifying the time of day, station, direction, and more. When designing the interface, we really wanted to keep the controls as minimal as possible in order to really let the map shine and take center stage. We also incorporated both 2D and 3D viewing options so that you can more easily navigate the visualization, and you can also pick out individual stations when the map gets busier and can also be more cluttered. So we took a lot of inspiration from existing data visualizations. One great example was Justin Fung's Manhattan Population Explorer. This was a really lovely example of geo-based storytelling that used the map of New York City as a narrative canvas. We wanted to bring that same format to an even more powerful data set and also include a more human element to it. Another example was the Coming California Megastorm by Raymond Zong, which used scroll-based interaction to move viewers through a 3D rainfall visualization. And last but not least, Population Mountains by Matt Daniel was another great example that used a categorical color legends as well as a 3D view to show how population masses of cities around the world can differ. So coming into this project, we knew we wanted to highlight more of New York City than just Manhattan. A lot of existing New York data visualizations often only highlight Manhattan, despite it carrying around 19% of the population. It really felt vital to include the outer boroughs in Subway Stories, given that they're such vital and rich sources of New York's culture and history. And across these 5 boroughs are millions of passengers who ride the New York City subway every day, with each passenger holding their own unique story. In each train car are different lives in motion, some people experiencing daily dramas and others experiencing small triumphs. After launching Subway Stories, we asked New Yorkers to recount their own experiences of riding the subway, and we'd love to share a few. Take Carton, for example. He wrote in to tell us that due to F-train construction, there hasn't been service at stations after Church Avenue, which has been going on for approximately 5 to 7 years now. Should be investigated. Highly unreasonable to the riding public. Or hear from Carrie. She said, "It's not a story, but just wanted to say that since COVID, I've had subway luck. I walk down and here comes the subway, like I hailed it. And I take the subway 3 to 4 times a day. It's almost weird and great. I hope it lasts." When reading these glimpses into people like Carton and Carrie's lives, we couldn't help but feel a profound sense of sonder. The realization that every individual has a life as rich and complex as we perceive our own to be. With that said, we would have loved to feature individual riders' stories even more prominently, but didn't get a chance due to time and resource constraints. With more time, we would have conducted more interviews and also put faces to the names and stories by photographing individuals who are comfortable at the subway stations that they frequent the most. We would have wanted to do that in order to help this site feel even more personal and add more touches of human elements. And so now, if anyone is willing, I'd love to open the floor for someone to share their own subway story. What is something interesting, weird, sentimental, or funny that you've experienced while riding the subway? Do we have any takers? Is anyone brave enough? Amazing. Okay, I will hand the mic to the person who raised their hand first.
Sure, I'm Scott, and I'm curious if anyone has run into people that they don't want to see and they leave their trip like a stop or two early to avoid a longer conversation with other people that they've had. And I'm also curious if you think those people know you're doing that when that happens. It's like I go from Bedford to like First or Third, and one time I needed to get off at Third, but I got off at First, and I was curious if that person knew that I was avoiding them, and I'd wonder if there was a larger trend of subway avoidance for friends and acquaintances. Thank you.
Raise of hands if anyone has done that before. I see a couple. Amazing, thanks for sharing. Did you also want to share a little anecdote? Yeah, no worries. Okay, I will. Bring them up.
I got it here.
Oh, okay.
Was it youth group? I raised my hand. Okay. I had the opposite situation where I saw someone that I thought I recognized from high school on a platform, but I hadn't seen them in years, so I messaged them on Instagram, and we both got on the same train, and I'm messaging them. I'm like, "Hey, like, are you in New York City?" And then it turned out it was them, and they messaged me back, and they found me because we're on the same car, and they're with their brother, and we're like going on the train, we're talking, and I'm like, "Oh, like I'm getting off at the next stop," and like, "Oh, like we're getting off at the next stop too." Turns out her brother lived right next to me, and he worked at my office, at my company, the floor above me, and I didn't know. And we just met on the subway.
I love that. I feel like moments like that make you feel like New York is so small. Amazing. Well, if you didn't get a chance and you would love to still share your subway story after, feel free to scan this QR code. And yeah, you can share more details, and maybe one day you can get featured in Subway Stories as well. Sweet. Now I'll pass it back to Jediah.
Thanks so much, Julia. I'm going to leave this on for like 20 more seconds in case anybody wants to scan it and share their story with us. Anyways, I really hope that all of you enjoyed this behind the scenes look at the Subway Stories project tonight. I think all of us probably came here because we feel like the subway is such an important part of what makes New York City, New York. It might be the only place where people of all backgrounds can rub shoulders. As the Subway Is exhibition says, if New York's lifeblood is its people, then the subway is like the circulatory system that keeps everything flowing. And I myself am a proud native New Yorker. I've been taking the subway since I was little, and since middle school, I would take it every day by myself to get to school. So it was such a personal honor for me to be able to represent the stories behind the people who take the train every day. If there's anything I want you to take away from tonight, it's that data is so powerful because it's the only way to measure New York City in its massive and chaotic splendor. Data scientists and data analysts have an amazing tool and also a responsibility to use it to uncover the truth about the city and also the world. But divorced from context, data can just become another sea of meaningless numbers. What we need to remember is that urban data measures human stories. Only by tying data back to its source, by making it feel relevant to people's everyday experiences, can we ever hope to convince anyone of what we have to say. So thank you so much to the Transit Museum for hosting us here tonight. Thanks to everyone who took a minute to contribute to Subway Stories, and thanks to all of you who took time out of your night to be here with us. Thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists. That was a fantastic presentation. We'd like to invite you to take a seat up, and we can open it up for some questions. You can actually take this with you to answer. So we have a couple mics, and we'd just love to hear if anybody has questions. We can start off here.
Hi, I'm Emma. That was really cool. Thank you so much for sharing. I have one question for the Subway Stories team and one question about the MTA Open Data. For the Subway Stories team, I imagine like time and resources were limited, but if you had more time, are there any data sets that you would have like cross-referenced your data with to like get a more complete journalistic picture that you kind of wish you could have incorporated? And then for the MTA Open Data program, I was interested in the fact that you can kind of estimate ridership from origin to destination and what like the privacy implications of that are. Like how are you getting that data? Yeah, thank you.
Cool, yeah, I can start with your question. I think probably the biggest part of the data set that we didn't really use and that I think we should have if we had more time was Staten Island. Staten Island's obviously the like middle child of New York City, but it's very much legally a part of the city, and so so those stories also, should be featured. And then one which is not actually an MTA data set that I really would have liked to use is the city bike data, which I think is somewhat public because I'm an avid city biker myself, and I think it's much more granular even than the subway is because of how many stations there are. So I think it'd been really cool to see that sort of data and talk to people like my friends and myself who are biking every day and get their stories on that. And then Lisa, if you want to take the question.
Yeah, so for our origin destination data set, I would hope most of you took the train or bus to get here, and as you notice, you did not swipe or tap out of the station or bus, right? You just only pay when you get in. So the short answer is we don't actually know where people are going. It is an estimate. In that data set, it's a really simplified estimate where we just take where you swipe or tap next, and we assume that is where you got off the train. There are definitely more complicated models to do this that we do run internally, but that is what we have the capacity to share in this data set.
Hi, yeah, awesome presentation. You did an awesome job in the storytelling and data visualization. So I have one question for the MTA Open Data. So for Metro North and LIRR, so do you have like a similar kind of origin destination data, like from the ticket machines and from the train time app?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question is, do we have similar origin destination data for Long Island Railroad and Metro North data from the train time app? We do not have that right now. I think just ridership on the commuter railroads is much more complicated because you do not swipe or tap in at a station, right? You board the train. Some people pay with the train time app. Some people are still using paper tickets. So just our ridership counts for that are right now not as good as they are for subway and bus. It's definitely something we want to work on this year, and I think in an ideal world we would have an origin destination data set for those modes as well.
Hi. With the advent of many more cameras in the subway, does that lead to any more data that's available? Are you able to essentially to track people anonymously or look at like car by car as or where people are entering and things along those lines, which I think maybe ties back to the first question and the second question also, because there does seem to be in the app a like for Metro North and Long Island Railroad, which is the busiest car or emptiest car, I guess.
Yeah, so we do not share personally identifiable information on open data. Never have, never will. Privacy of our customers is a top concern for us, and we don't ever want to release anything that would be counter to that. For passenger crowding specifically, that we're not getting that from reading people's faces or anything. It's actually using the weight of the train to estimate how many people are on board. Of course, this is not perfect, right? A lot of people take their luggage on Long Island Railroad to go to Jamaica and go to JFK, so it is just that, an estimate, but that's where those colors come from on the train time app.
Oh, hold up.
Hi, great job. What data surprised you the most, and what is your next project?
Yeah, well, I think, honestly, it shouldn't be that surprising, but probably the most surprising thing to me was how many people are coming into New York every day to go to work. I think it's maybe 20% or more of Manhattan's population during the work hours are just people from out of town. And I think that probably shouldn't surprise anyone who works in Midtown and is super familiar with that. But for me, having grown up and gone to school here and who wasn't in the working world for a while, I think it was a big shock to realize that New York is not just our place, it's really this place for the entire tri-state area. And then in terms of the next project, I think something we want to work on next is, as Mark said, taking that historical data, so now that we have data from 2020 and onwards, and investigating trends over time and the COVID era trends, and seeing if people are still actually staying out as late as they used to, because I feel like restaurants are closing earlier, and confirming if that's really a thing or just something that we lament, but it's not real.
Can you all talk a little bit about the tech stack behind Subway Stories? Question one, and then question two, have you seen any interesting interactions between the congestion tax and ridership on the subway?
Yeah, to answer your second question really briefly, it's too soon to tell. And the data set we use it needs time to be prepared, so it only comes out a month after the fact. And so it will take a bit of time before we even have the data to actually see. But I think Lisa's team has done some amazing work already at analyzing the preliminary impact of congestion pricing. So if she wants to talk about that later, I'll give her the chance. And then as for the tech stack, this probably doesn't mean anything to most of you, but the app is like a regular React app, and it uses this company called Mapbox, which provides the beautiful map. And then we have a database behind the scenes, which we downloaded from the open data and are hosting it ourselves to do that. But if you want to learn more about that after, I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I guess in terms of congestion pricing, we do have data coming soon. It is why everyone who's from the data analytics team here looks so tired. It is coming, so there will be stuff. I actually asked what I was allowed to say before coming here. That's all I'm allowed to say.
Test. Maybe a question for the MTA team or the data team. Have you guys cross-referenced or considered cross-referencing data from Google Maps, transit, those crowdsourced phone tracking sources that figure out where people are going to and from on the subway? Is that information that you've access to or have talked about getting access to?
Not that I am aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
Sorry, I also have a question for the team in general. You mentioned that you had a couple interesting interviews with the subway vendors, et cetera. Do you have any particular interview stories that you found really interesting that may not have made its way into the presentation?
Thank you for the question. Not really. Most of what we did include, because of the limited time frame, we didn't have that much time to go get a ton of different interviews. And honestly, when I was doing interviews there was a bit of a language barrier, so I was doing my best to kind of gauge and write things down accurately. But if we'd had more time, I would have loved to have gotten more comprehensive interviews and maybe have 3 or 5 interviews for every story instead of just the one that we included.
I think we have time for a few more questions. Here we go.
Hi, this is for the Subway Stories team. You all got introduced with your full-time jobs, I'm assuming, and I was wondering, sorry to assume, how you had the time to do all of this outside of that, and more specifically, what the time commitment was to this, and maybe even like personal investment into this project.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, and honestly, it was tough having a job and doing this. I think something that helped was at the time I was sort of in a transition period of my job, and so that gave me a little more time to like focus on this. I will admit I did not mention to my boss that I was doing this at the time, but sorry, remind me your other question. The time commitment. Yeah, I think if I had to estimate, maybe around like 40 to 60 hours into this. It's hard to say because I wasn't really keeping track of that, but definitely a lot of time spent on the weekends, and as that final week came up and trying to put all the stories together, definitely we were staying up late trying to get it all in before the deadline. But I think we just all felt really passionate about the project, and that helped make it possible.
Over here.
Hey, all, great work. One of my questions is how you guys might pivot around data noise. So if you're looking at things like, ridership and then the congestion pricing, how might you adjust against things where maybe people might not be riding the subway because they're using things like city bikes or all the bike lanes that have been opening up? So that might maybe reflect a downturn in ridership, but maybe an upturn in using other transit options.
Sorry, is that for us for the project or for the MTA's open data?
Open data.
So the MTA, we have the data we have, right? Right now, this is just the subway origin destination data set. We, as far as I know, haven't worked with the city bike data internally and like combine that with our own ridership data. Can you repeat your question?
So like if you're working with NY.dot and they have, bike ridership estimates versus your ridership, could you correlate those or collate that data to figure out, some of this ridership that might be going down for one reason is actually for another, or balance out that noise?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Something we found before we published this subway origin destination data set is we of course want to like QC every data set that goes out to the portal. And one of our amazing teammates here, Shaul, caught something that we thought maybe this data is incorrect, because we were seeing one of the top origin destination pairs were along 2 stations on the 7 line. And we were like, why is that? We would expect it would be, Grand Central, Times Square, all this other stuff. And we realized it was actually most likely due to people transferring to the bus at those stations and traveling within Queens. So I think maybe like a next step to using this data would be developing some sort of data set with the bus system combined somehow. Yeah, there's a lot we could do with the data. If we had more team, we would do it all.
Hi, I had a question for the Subway Stories team, a little about like the human piece behind how did you form your group, how did you get together, did you know each other in advance, or were you kind of united by the project?
So Jediah and Julia work together, and then I just know Jediah through some mutual friends, and we all kind of do the same things. And I think he kind of approached me like, hey, there's this really cool project. Would you be interested in working on it? And then that's kind of how it came together.
Yeah, just to say that I had been waiting a long time. I think every 3 or 4 years, the MTA will do some kind of contest. And I think I actually knew someone who had participated in one years ago, and I thought it was really cool. And so when I actually saw this, I was like, all right, I'm going to drop everything else that I'm working on to do this.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, this is a question for Open Data. I just wondered what data sets to use to track fare evasion, since that's a hot topic also.
Yeah, we do have fare evasion data sets for both our subway and bus. There's a lot that goes into calculating fare evasion. You can read all about it in the overview documentation on the data sets. I think one of them is almost 20 pages that describes how we actually measure that. So shout out again to our teammate Shaul, who figured out how all that works.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. A big round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you all for coming and spending your cold evening with us. We'd love to have you back at the museum. Again, our Subway is ... exhibit is really fantastic, so please make it back. We're open again Wednesday through Sunday, 10 a.m. through to 4 p.m. If you want to find out about future programs, they are all listed on our calendar online, and if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get all those updates every other week. If you are interested in becoming a member, you get lots of great benefits, including access to some of our special tours, discounts, free admission, all of that. And also consider giving a donation. Help us keep these kinds of programs going. But thanks so much for coming, and we'll see you next time.
As Shaul's father, I appreciate the 2 shout-outs.
Good job.